other thing that has me pretty excited, not on a positive, is this parking lot conversion into low-income housing. And it was tried to be done in the dark of night, and now we're organized. There's going to be litigation, and I think we can probably put a ballot initiative on the ballot to prevent it, or alternatively, maybe we'll just go directly at the people who tried to do this in the stealth of night.
Welcome to Thursday Night Talk. This is a show where we discuss Humboldt, the local issues and the local personalities. I'm Talvi. I'll be your local host for the next hour. Tonight, we are going to be talking about people versus parking lots and the pervasive NIMBYism when it comes to housing or low-income citizens of California in general, and in Eureka more specifically. For those unaware of what NIMBYism means, from the Cambridge Dictionary, the behavior of someone who does not want something to be built or done near where they live. Although it does need to be built or done somewhere. It is short for not in my backyard, and is the antithesis to NIMBY the Cloud, the beloved children's book by Jasper Tompkins, where a cloud baby learns that it's okay to break through diversity by being themselves. No relation to NIMBY the Cloud. Every time projects, such as the ones being proposed by the Eureka City Council are offered, groups such as Citizens for a Better Eureka appear and seemingly attempt to sink what can be considered by some to be a quick fix, affordable housing solution. Is it really just about parking or environmentalism? Is it about bias against business owners, which don't fit into a specific demographic? Are claims that building affordable housing on a few downtown parking lots will lead to an array of impacts ranging from traffic congestion to business closures, violent crime? Are they actually valid? Are those fears truly valid? Or is this really about who gets to live where, who gets to own businesses? Or maybe it's about egos who think they know what is best for this community. Our guests tonight are Tom Wheeler, Executive Director of Environmental Protection Information Center, and also hosts the Echo News Report every 11 a.m. Saturday and Sunday right here on KZZH. We have got Colin Fiske, Executive Director for the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities, and Caroline Griffith, Executive Director of the Northcoast Environmental Center. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Hi, Talvi.
Hi, and just a note before we start, one of our producers did try to contact Security National, which is owned by Rob Arkley and is a party to the recently filed lawsuit, and they were asked to be part of the discussion. Request kind of went unanswered, and not just for him, but for others who were part of this. Go figure. They're welcome on the show in the future. Would love to get a well-rounded take on this, and that's that. So I know everybody kind of has something to say. Colin, let's start off with you because we were talking before the program began, and it's just interesting to me that we do have this housing issue. There are these parking lots that you see consistently empty. Some of them are kind of in shambles, and why can't we use them for housing? What's going on?
Well, we can, and we should. And, that's exactly what the city of Eureka has proposed and has actually planned to do for a number of years now. For their originally adopted this plan several years ago. And not only is it sort of underutilized parking that could house a lot of people instead of very few cars, they're also in really great locations for housing. They're near downtown. They're walkable to a lot of destinations, services, jobs. They're right on transit routes. So yeah, we can and we should.
And what do you think is, just, I know we don't have anybody here who's going to disagree that we need housing, and it's kind of a bummer that we don't have somebody on the show who's for ceasing these projects going on. So I kind of I mean, I don't know who could ask about like trying to get into the mentality of that, though. Maybe Thomas.
Yeah, sure. I can try to give the best argument for the other side, because I think it's important that we fully understand the argument from the other side, and then we can dissect and figure out why it's wrong. So the other side's argument is that, look, this parking is vitally important to the Old Town downtown community. This is where people park their cars near businesses. They go in, they shop at those businesses, and that it's going to cause large economic harm to these folks who are, largely small mom and pop sorts of stores that have really struggled in the last couple of years with the pandemic and now with inflation, and we're just adding hurt on top of hurt, right? The other thing that they will say is that they will say, we don't disagree that we should create housing. We should create housing elsewhere. So Rob Arkley's company, Security National, is pursuing its own housing project. This would be somewhere around an 800-bed project out off of Indianola Cutoff. So, they're not. They believe, if you were to hold them in good faith, that there are other opportunities, other areas that could be developed, and that really it's just that we are kind of picking on these parking lots, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I would say I think that it's a lot of it is kind of based on misconceptions too. I think like you're right, Tom. Like a lot of folks in businesses have had a pretty rough few years, and so I think when that happens, you try to look around and be like, what is the cause of this? When in fact it's multiple things piling up, and so. The reaction is just against a change that they have a picture in their mind of the worst possible scenario. When they hear, first of all, the parking lots are going away, they imagine every one of their elderly customers, having to walk multiple blocks. But then I think that also a picture appears in their mind of the worst housing development that could possibly be. Without really thinking about or looking at some of the plans that have come forward for some of these to see that these actually would be pretty nice places that are for people who, yes, are low income, but let's look at what low income means when it comes to housing. And I would say, the majority of people that I know fit into that category. You can make up to $21 an hour. If you work 40 hours a week, which most people I know don't get to work 40 hours a week and still fit into this category of low income. But instead, a lot of folks kind of have this picture. They're picturing like Cabrini Green in Chicago, right? Which that brings along all sorts of, racial and class implications too. But it's unfortunate that there hasn't been an opportunity to bring them along and say, look how cool this could be.
Would they be less opposed if it was a mixed housing situation? Again, I have so many questions for people who are doing this, because one thing I've learned, or at least I feel to be somewhat true, is statistically speaking, the more high income places, the more that low income places open up. Because when people have the money to afford a nicer place, backed by a security gate and with a doorman, people who can afford it will take that. But when they don't have that opportunity, they'll take the low income housing. So
that's not even just your personal, reflection, your own lived experience. That is what the academic literature also says. This phenomenon is called price filtering in housing. And so if we build luxury housing, it will filter down and will affect prices at other housing levels. So your moderate income, low income housing, if we build more supply, we will moderate pricing. Same too, if we build more low income housing, it will also moderate pricing within our housing market. So this lawsuit would seek to stop at a minimum 245 units of housing. That's the kind of array of the challenge that they are presenting. 245 units in Eureka is a huge amount of new housing. That's more than we created in the period between 2010 and 2020. So it's a very significant amount that could come online in the next 10 years that is that may be stopped as a result of this lawsuit.
I feel
I
like
think
245 units would be filled up within a week. Like I know so many people looking for places that are stacked in, sharing rooms and things like that because they just can't find anything.
There was a project in Arcata, Sorrel Place. Colin, you probably remember how many people applied for Sorrel Place and how many people were able to be fit within that low-income housing project.
I don't have the number off the tip of my tongue here, but it filled up very rapidly, and they had way more applicants than they had space for. And I think that also is an important aspect of it. Tom was talking about sort of housing market dynamics, and building new housing in general does affect the price. But it's also true that the market itself, just as with many other sort of basic needs, isn't going to solve the housing problem and create affordability for everybody. And so that's why another reason that these particular projects that the city is proposing are so important is because they have particular restrictions on affordability to folks who are make less money. And so having those subsidies and those affordability restrictions in addition to just building more housing is really important.
If I could, one of the reasons why the city of Eureka is doing it this way, it is releasing city-owned land for housing development, for low-income housing development, is that the kind of market dynamics of low-income housing development are so difficult that it just often doesn't get built. If you just kind of zone an area or expect that low-income housing could be built in an area, there are a lot of costs, particularly related to, acquiring the land on which the project is going to sit, that frustrate that kind of housing development. So this was a deliberate move by the city of Eureka. This isn't something, as Rob Arkley said in the opening clip, that was done, under the shadow of night or in some smoky back room. This was in the 2019 housing element that was part of the general plan update that thousands of people participated in the city of Eureka, that went before multiple planning commissions, that went before the Eureka City Council. And actually, the only reason that Rob Arkley is even able to challenge this project is that the city went out of their way after the housing element was adopted to try to preserve more parking. So in response to kind of a backlash against housing on parking lots, the city said, hey, look, we're willing to trade properties. We have this roster of parking lots. If somebody wants to, give us land in exchange for one of these parking lots, that's fine by us. And that's what happened. So a partnership between Bill Pearson, Redwood Capital Bank, and the city was formed to switch 3 lots and to trade them for property somewhat near Winco on Broadway. So because of that, the city then had to go back and change the housing element. They had to amend their 2019 housing element in 2022 because they went out of their way to protect more parking. And only because of that does this lawsuit exist, because otherwise they would have been barred by the statute of limitations under CEQA from filing this lawsuit.
Which, do you want to explain to our listeners and those watching on YouTube what CEQA is?
Yeah, sorry, I just use an acronym without explaining it. CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. I am an environmental attorney by trade. I work for environmental organization that routinely uses CEQA. What the law demands is that you look before you leap, that you study the potential environmental impacts of a proposed action before it's approved, before it can be funded, before it can move forward. We don't want to have another situation like we had with the nuclear power plant at Humboldt Bay and build a power plant on top of an active fault. Stuff like that was the inspiration for CEQA when it was enacted in 1970. So it's a good law. It does good things. It requires us to have some degree of planning for environmental impacts. But what is unfortunately happening is that CEQA is being abused by folks who want to challenge housing projects. So 1/4 of all CEQA lawsuits are against housing development brought by neighbors. This is the largest category of CEQA lawsuits. And within that kind of pool of CEQA lawsuits, 87% of those challenge what are called infill development projects. We are trying to build on already developed land. The rest challenge things on green spaces, things like farms and fields. So overwhelmingly, the law is being directed against kind of the best projects that we need in our communities, things where we're trying to build housing in walkable, bikeable communities that are going to reduce long-term greenhouse gas emissions. The state of California has gone out of its way to say that this is the environmentally preferred kind of development for our state, that we need this kind of housing. And our California environmental laws are being abused by folks in bad faith to try to kill the environmentally preferred thing. Caroline, I think you had your hand up.
Well, yeah, I remember this is many months ago, a pretty high profile situation in, maybe it was Mill Valley, California, but it was a high-end neighborhood used CEQA to try to argue against a housing development by claiming that their entire neighborhood was mountain lion habitat. But I'm curious, Tom or Colin, if either of you have looked at a lot of these other CEQA lawsuits and looked at what the arguments are that people are making against them.
Yeah, so a very common one would be that this tall building next to me is going to shade my garden, and that shade is some sort of an environmental impact, and it's going to cause this kind of cascade of harms, right? So by shading my garden, then I'm going to have to go buy produce at the grocery store. And that produce is going to come from a long ways away, and then all the greenhouse gas emissions. Wouldn't it just be eco-groovy if I could, grow zucchini in my backyard? Or there was a lawsuit in Berkeley that was challenging the construction of a student housing project near the university that said, students are loud, and if I have more students near me, then that's going to increase noise pollution. So this kind of idea that humans are pollution is really rooted in some misanthropic ideas of what an environmental impact are. And I think that we also see, just to kind of preview the claims that Citizens for a Better Eureka have brought, we see that kind of same misanthropic idea of environmental impacts brought in this lawsuit.
I think one of the claims made in this lawsuit, which I think is, it's actually kind of funny if it weren't so serious, is basically that building, these infill projects, like Tom was saying, these environmentally friendly, walkable infill projects will force people out of the city and force them to, build sprawling development elsewhere. And therefore that will have impacts. And so, you were sort of living in this upside down world where they're saying, we know sprawl is bad, and therefore we're going to say that infill is going to cause sprawl, which I guess leads you to the conclusion that there's no good kind of development. It's just a little ironic coming from folks who are proposing sprawl in other places.
So we're going to take a quick break, and this is kind of a good time to do it. After the break, I do want to ask the questions, or what are the consequences if we do follow the infill housing that the city wants versus what happens if we just keep parking lots? And we'll get to that. I'm Talvi Fried, your local host here on KZDH. This is Thursday Night Talks. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that quick dance break. We are discussing the roadblocks to affordable housing in Humboldt County. We'll be taking your Zoom calls if you do want to call in and have a comment, especially if you are part of the Citizens for the Betterment of Eureka, I believe that's the name of it. Would love to hear from you. The phone number is 669-900-6833. Again, get your pen out, 669-900-6833. And you're going to need the meeting ID number to join. It's 511-886-8501. Again, 511-886-8501. And I am here joined by Tom Wheeler, Colin Fiske, I keep wanting to say Colin, and Caroline Griffith. Colin Fiske, not Whisk. Okay. And Caroline Griffith, of course, thank you all so much for being here. And I wanted to go back to the question of, without any bias, if this is even possible, because I know everybody has their backgrounds, and I think we all are biased on both sides, especially in a case like this, and to try not to see things through what we want, but necessarily what could actually happen. What is the likeliest, statistically speaking, or if looking at other examples throughout different communities of what are the consequences of if the city manages to build 250 housing units, so that would be 3 structures or something like that they're trying to build, versus what happens if they don't and it just stays parking lots. So I don't know. Let's start with Colin.
Sure. I think you could answer that in a number of different ways. Just from the perspective of housing, that means there would be less of it. And so, presumably there would be more housing insecurity in the community if these things don't get built, potentially more people living on the streets. And so, from that perspective, you can compare building housing with not. From a transportation perspective, which is my kind of area of expertise, you'd be putting more housing, as I mentioned earlier, close to destinations that people have to get to, close to jobs, close to shopping and services and so forth. And so, you would be providing, especially compared to most of the housing that's available in Humboldt County, you'd be providing people with a much greater opportunity to use those healthy, low carbon modes of transportation, like walking and biking and riding the bus. And so that helps us reach our climate goals. It helps us reach our, our goals around public health and so forth. I think, in terms of the concerns that people have about parking, and I'm trying to be even-handed here, but, the city did recently complete an inventory and study of public parking in the downtown area. And, they found that there's a relatively high vacancy rate, even at the busiest times. And contrary to what some folks are saying, those data were not all taken like during the height of the pandemic. That's, 5 or 7 years of data that they're looking at. And so I don't really think that it would actually impact the parking supply all that significantly. And so, anything that might stem from that, I wouldn't see those impacts being very great.
I think that we also have other tools that we can use to ensure that we have a sufficient supply of parking for folks who want to visit businesses in downtown and Old Town. Right now, we are giving away parking for free, and it offers kind of no incentive for folks to find another way to get to this location. I think if we were to charge for parking, even a minimal amount, it provides some degree of refreshing of parking. So folks, the employee of Smug's Pizza isn't just kind of moving his car every 2 hours and kind of taking up a parking space. It discourages behavior like that, and it allows for kind of turnover of parking spots. On the economic impacts, parking does impact businesses. I think that the extent to which it impacts businesses is probably overstated and based on kind of anecdotal feelings that folks have as business owners, or the complaints they might get from folks coming into their shop. An overabundance of parking doesn't necessarily mean things are going to go well for your business either. Let's take a look down at the Bayshore Mall and the kind of vast acreage of asphalt that we have there and the totally failing businesses. If parking was the only thing that people are considering, it's not a complete picture. There is another benefit here from placing people near services, near businesses, which I think is going to create a more enlivened, lively old town, downtown community. As someone who lives in Eureka, who lives within walking distance of these buildings, often at night it kind of feels a bit dead down there. Having more people live in the community is going to have more people out on the streets, more people frequenting that Smugs Pizza. And I think that there is going to be an economic benefit from having, 245 plus new units, housing units in this area. And when I say housing units too, I should explain that doesn't mean that it's going to be 245 people. These are 245 new apartments, 1, 2, 3-bedroom apartments that could offer, families a place to live. So it's not just, 245 more people in downtown. It's 245 families potentially that are going to be living in our community, shopping at local businesses. As well, if we can get more people to walk, bike to Old Town, we know from social science data that folks who walk and bike will ultimately spend more per shopping trip than people who arrive by car. So a lot of communities have noticed when they've moved to kind of a pedestrian plaza type model where parking is eliminated and you really encourage, walking and biking, that total sales will increase because people want to be there. They will walk around and they will window shop. And I think that that's kind of the vision that I have for my fair city as a Eureka resident. I am really excited to see what this does to Old Town. In my view, I think it's going to be a benefit.
Mm-hmm. In regards to parking, I did hear someone, a public commenter at one of the city council meetings where this was discussed, say, geometrically, it's impossible for all of us to park in front of the store that we're going to, so like no matter what, people are going to have to walk to where they're going, right? Because every single storefront only has one parking spot right in front of it, right? Even if you're in the parking lot, you still have to walk, around the corner. You park in that lot by Clark Plaza, you got to walk around the corner to Eureka Books, so no matter what, you're going to have to walk. But one thing that I think could come out of building these units is that because of the fact that it is low-income housing, because of the fact that the developers in this city of Eureka oftentimes have to pay for state grant money to do it, that means that there's a lot of times funding built into these things for better transit, to actually improve transportation options around the area. So it can be a way to not only provide housing for people, but to also help make people not have to drive to Old Town by increasing those transit options. And I think it's one that there's often the argument people make, and it's very much a chicken and the egg thing, because they're like, well, how can we expect people to ride public transit if the transit's not good? Well, here's a way we can make the transit better, and then people will ride it.
I think that there is also a way that lots of parking is being employed by this group to really conceal what is effectively an anti-affordable housing project here in this lawsuit. So, for example, the C to F Street lot in Eureka. Right now, it's just a big gravel parking lot that is poorly maintained by the city, provides some measure of parking during the day, but not a whole lot. At the most recent city council meeting where they were going to release this site for development, Allison Holland, Rob Barkley's daughter, and an important person within Security National came up to the microphone and said, "We don't want you to release this parking lot for housing. How about we turn it into a park instead? We at Security National would love to purchase this lot from the city, and we will turn it into a park, and we will gift it then back for use of a park to the city," which kind of undermines their argument that this is all about parking, right? because if you turn it into a park, I don't think that you can like shove your F-150 on top of a seesaw. So again, I think that this is just rooted in kind of classist ideas about the kind of the people who might be living near my business being undesirable because they're low income. As Caroline said, this is going to cover a lot of folks. In my time at Epic, most of it, I would have qualified for low income housing. In my life, I've been on food stamps. I don't think I am a worse person because I don't make a ton of money.
I too wanted to bring up that C Street has parking, and I know that they've been in talks to develop it. Then why not develop it into a parking lot then, instead of a big bunch of gravel rocks that nobody really wants to park in? Because I mean, it kind of wrecks your car to park there, and there's puddles, and it just doesn't look safe. It just doesn't look safe. So why not develop that? Which leads me to ask the question of the safety factors, because if the undesirables move in, will it actually be less safe than it is now, or would it be more safe because there's people and families and kind of you get that neighborhood watch vibe going? So like, I don't know if Colin.
Yeah, there's like one of the sort of early urbanists and still among the most famous, Jane Jacobs, sort of pioneered this concept of eyes on the street, which is that the more people are around, the more activity there is on the street, the safer it is, just because there's people there and that people are watching and people are doing stuff and there's a social vibe. And I think that, a lot of the research bears that out. I think there's also this really, classist assumption baked into that to begin with, the idea that people who earn less money are somehow dangerous or, criminals or something. And so I think we should object to that characterization from the beginning, but regardless, yeah, the more people that we bring to these downtown areas, I think the safer that they'll be.
Aren't criminals supposed to be rich? Like if they were good criminals.
If they're doing it right, they are.
Right? Yes, Thomas.
So one of the arguments in this lawsuit is that this is going to cause some sort of an impact to the employees of all of these businesses in Old Town and downtown, because they won't be able to park as close to their shops, their stores, their offices as they could. They're going to have to walk a longer distance, and that longer walk is going to expose them to more houseless people who are going to accost them and ask them for money and maybe harass them, or in the worst case, commit acts of violence against them. And I think that this is kind of the worldview of the folks who brought this lawsuit, is that, downtown is scary. These people are scary. And there's a conflation between, folks who are experiencing houselessness and folks who are low income. Really, also, if we want to solve or address our houselessness issue, getting more low income housing is one of our top solutions. But to be clear, low income housing is not supportive housing. It's not transitional housing. This is not, the place where you're going to put somebody who came off the street and they're trying to get their life back together. That's not this. This is for folks who are working, who have jobs, who just don't make above $21 an hour, which is, basically most of our retail service industry jobs.
Curious about the folks who work at Security National, how much they make, the entry-level employees, and if they would qualify for this. And I have to say, like, it really, this conflating poor people and unhoused people with dangerous criminals, like, it makes me really mad, but it also makes me sad for the people who have who feel that way. Just because, I used to live in Old Town, and I would be out at night, and when it was totally dead, it would feel a little sketchy, but I always knew that there was that one guy who was a reader who would always be sleeping in this one doorway, and I knew that, if I walked that way, that guy would know, and he would know that I was there, and that these are our neighbors, whether they live on the streets, whether they work at the grocery store, whether they, work as a janitor at the hospital. Like, they're our neighbors. They deserve safe places to live. And honestly, like the lifestyle that I was able to enjoy living in Old Town, where I could walk everywhere, was really phenomenal. Like, it was just like a really great quality of life to be able, like, I'm just gonna, like, go walk down to the waterfront. And I did spend more money there because I was walking past those businesses all the time. And so, I would see a thing in the window and pop in. And I really think that this is a really amazing opportunity to provide that quality of life to people who are on the lower end of the economic spectrum. And I really, really, like, I don't agree with everything the city of Eureka does, but I feel pretty stoked about this. And we all, put out an opinion piece about, calling BS on this lawsuit for a variety of reasons. But I really hope that, like, this gets resolved quickly, is found to be as frivolous as we think it is, so we can move on with this process. Because I think that once we have some of this housing built, people will be like, oh, hey, this is actually pretty rad.
It is hard to know exactly what specifically would happen, but we can look at Arcata. They had built 2 new projects, and I know people who live in each of them, and they love it. They feel safer there than in past places that they live. In most cases, they've gotten to know their neighbors, and they all work together to create kind of a good environment, because I feel like people who know the alternative of not living in a safe housing situation really appreciate when they can have that, and they really do take care of it to the best of their abilities, which I think is kind of, with Kim Burgell as mayor, her message to everybody was, this is the year of, like, making a mentally healthy community. That's her goal. And how housing, your first safety requirement in life is shelter, and not just shelter, but safe shelter. And that also means safety from within that household, safety from, having poor plumbing and things like that. And, like, if the city's providing this, it's, I know everybody's going to be like, sign me up. Like, and I kind of bummed, like, does it always have to be low income housing? Because I know a lot of people that are living with, I'm lucky with my landlord, but I know a lot of people who are unlucky with their landlords, or who moved in and thought they were getting one thing and realize it's covered in mold, but they can't move out because it's too expensive, or they're stuck in a contract, or, because there are predatory, the Squireses of the world. And so just creating more housing that's safe, I feel like, would just be such a boost to the mental wellness of the community. And you're right, because I live closest to Old Town, definitely within I call it stumbling distance, but walking distance. And when I'm walking through there, I can't hop in my car and grab an extra jacket. I'm just going to go to a shop, like, they have some, I'm not going to name names, but there's some really cute shops there that I know for a pretty inexpensive price, I can get a really nice vintage jacket. And I'm going to do that instead of sometimes I'm like, I'll just walk home unless it's like pouring rain. It's like, what, I'm here, may as well get a new thing. So there's just that thought. Colin, you seem like you want to say something.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I think another thing that's important when we're talking about, high quality housing, especially for folks who don't make a lot of money, is that living in a place where you don't need to own and operate a car is really huge. Because, in Humboldt County, because it's so car dependent, most of the communities, transportation is almost as big of a household cost as housing itself. And so, putting housing in places where you can get around without one is a really big deal for folks who may have trouble affording, the costs of owning and operating a vehicle.
So Thomas, I want you to save that thought for a brief moment. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back to discuss whatever Thomas has to say. This is Thursday Night Talks. You're listening to KZZH. Loving these dance breaks. For those who are unaware, you can, I don't know if they can see all of us dancing at once, but at some point we're gonna make sure to screen capture that so that everybody who watches on YouTube can just see us all jamming out during the breaks. Because it's true, our theme song is amazing. Forget who names it, but we'll ask after. It'll say it on the YouTube channel. So everyone on this panel, be sure to watch yourselves on the Access Humboldt YouTube page. Though getting back to the topic at hand, which is kind of it's called a repeat by meter or metre meter. Are we French here? We were talking about the current lawsuit against the city of Eureka, forcing them to do a CEQA or an environmental study on certain properties, turning parking lots into housing for everybody. And Tom, I hope, and I'm here with Caroline Griffith, Colin Fiske, and Thomas Wheeler. Thomas, if you wanted to carry on with your thoughts from before the break.
Yeah, so one thing to be clear is the city did do environmental analysis for the release of the housing element. What the Citizens for a Better Eureka lawsuit says is that environmental analysis was flawed for these ways. And that, amongst them are that, we didn't consider all of these environmental impacts, which I as an environmental lawyer, don't believe are truly environmental impacts. Things like, oh, I'm going to be harassed by a homeless person. And so just to be clear, they looked at these sites, they looked at the environmental impacts, and they said, look, this is what we want to do. This is the environmentally preferred thing. And so I just want to put that out there. And one of the reasons why this is environmentally preferred, this builds off of comments that both Colin and Caroline made, is that amongst the projects that are being challenged is the Earth Center. This is a combined workforce housing / public transit hub for the city of Eureka, where we can have retail on the bottom, as well as a transit center with housing on upper floors. So if we are trying to reduce our dependency on automobiles, if we want to enable people to be able to get around our communities without cars, which I think is something that we all kind of want, whether or not we ride the bus, less cars on the street, even if we're a driver. This is going to be one of those things that enables us to take that next step, to have better transit in our community, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and on automobiles. And again, the Earth Center is at risk. This is one of the multiple housing projects, multiple areas that are challenged under this lawsuit.
Interesting. I mean, it's just interesting to me, because we have kind of a transportation expert here, and we've got Colin, who, when we were discussing the Arcata Gateway project on an earlier show, which again everyone can go and look at on YouTube, it's all there, though. It was a discussion of creating this place that they kind of aren't creating parking for it. And one of the biggest issues with the Gateway project that people were complaining about, even though that's a whole different thing, we're not going to get into that because that's its own beast and there's a whole show on it, but parking was an issue. And the transportation issues were there. And Thomas, you had mentioned a transportation center. And that's one thing that I'm not seeing that the city of Eureka was trying to claim was going to happen, was businesses and then housing units, which I think, like, I haven't seen the plans. I don't know if anybody has for what they're trying to build, though creating a
I can speak to that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, just so for most of these sites, it's pretty much housing that they're prioritizing. But for the what they call the C to F street sites on the waterfront, because of the way those are zoned, they would have to have like visitor serving commercial on the bottom floor. So it would include that. And then, as Tom mentioned, part of the plan also is this big transit hub, which would have housing above it. So this is focused on creating housing, but it also includes a bunch of other important services.
So Thomas, you had raised your hand when I said, "Has anybody seen the plans?"
Well, so this is part of it, is that we have descriptions of what the city would accept when they release these sites. So they're putting out requests for proposals. They're saying, if you want to have site control over this parking lot, you're going to have to come back with something that's going to produce a minimum number of units that could be for low income and for very low income. And you, for these sites, like Colin said, we're going to have to integrate this transit hub with housing, or for C to F Street, commercial on the first floor, as well as actually, Colin, public use of the top floor of the C to F Street building as well. So the city has some degree to set parameters on this project. The thing that's exciting to me is, as I said a couple of times throughout this show, this is going to produce at a minimum 245 housing units. And I say at a minimum because the city has released 3 parking lots for development that the Arkley lawsuit cannot get after, because they were approved and everything was done before this lawsuit was filed. Those projects, which are being developed by a low-income housing developer, a nonprofit low-income housing developer, came in way above the minimums that the city wanted. So we're getting more housing than was the minimum. But we know that as a backstop, we're going to get at least what was promised in the RFP for these sites, and that's at least 245 units.
And I'm assuming here that so there's no actual plans for the specific buildings except for the one from that one developer, because I know that there are several buildings that I would consider low housing or low income housing buildings already in Eureka, with businesses on the bottom and housing on the top, but it's almost like a tenement where there's like a shared bathroom and a hallway. And it's interesting. It was surprising to me to see that, because it's very similar to a roommate situation, just with 12 people, and that's, I mean, if that's what low income housing is going to look like, and that's better for people, then that's one thing. But it also feels like people should have a space for their own family units who they can. Yeah, because I feel like that should be a very inexpensive thing, and even that I've heard has gone up in pricing, which is not cool to me. Yes, Thomas.
So these projects, low-income housing projects, often have a state and federal component to them, because they're not making money off of traditional market mechanisms. So they're often grant funded or contain conditions that, because of funding, that ensure that kind of old school, low-income housing won't be constructed. So for example, we do have a good example with the 3 parking lots that have been released that will be developed by Link of what these might look like, which is a Victorian-inspired design that is 4 to 5 stories tall, that have 1, 2, 3 bedroom units. To get state funding, there is a requirement for on-site solar production. Link Housing is also going after grants that would allow for improvements adjacent to the building. So pedestrian improvements on nearby streets with bulb outs and other kind of pedestrian safety features. I believe Link Housing is even considering giving their residents bus passes as part of this development. So, you know, we aren't talking about kind of a very confined, small, kind of sad existence here. We're talking about nice new buildings. You know, there isn't going to be black mold in them. That I think everybody who is you know within that income threshold is going to be putting in their application and crossing their fingers, as everybody's going to want to live in these spots.
Yeah, and with the Link project, not only pedestrian improvements, also pretty significant bike and bus improvements, and also not only free bus passes for residents, but they've applied for money that would fund an on-demand transit service to complement the existing bus service that would serve, you know, a lot of the city of Eureka. And so, you know, we're talking about improving all of these options for everybody in the city.
Yeah, and a lot of these, you know, what I've seen from the Link Housing proposals too, different amenities like community gardens and communal spaces, and just all these things that are not like the typical features that we usually see in what you're describing, Talvi. And I think that so many of us who are on the lower end of the economic spectrum have just come to expect that we're going to live in crappy places, that like, you know, that you can, the doors don't close, you hear your neighbors all the time, there's black mold, like all these things that you're just like, well, I guess I have to deal with this because this is what we have. So it is exciting to think about like that, just there being options that aren't like terrible.
Right? Just nice options would be great for everybody. I mean, I think everybody knows at least a few people who are literally just begging to see if anybody has a place for them, and they have the budget for it. It's just there isn't anywhere for them to live, or the conditions that they would have to live in, they're just not willing to pay for it. Before we go into the round robin, I do want to say I agree with parking permits for Old Town, because I'm willing to pay that per year, because and I know they're going to start enforcing things again soon. They let like laxed up during the pandemic, and I know they're going to start enforcing things again, and I know I'm going to rack up tickets. It's just the way the world works. So it'd be cheaper for me. And I think a lot of other people who don't even park down there would also buy it. And it's just more money for the city of Eureka. I have brought this up to them before. I've brought it to council meetings, and I brought it to the transportation committee. Though we are going to go into the round robin. Caroline, let's start with you, so you can jump on.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you are in luck, Talvi. I'm on the City of Eureka's Transportation Safety Commission, and we are going to be having a special meeting at some time in May, specifically about parking. So I can keep you updated, so you can come in and give your 2 cents.
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
A lot to say about it. I have so much to say about it.
Cool.
So let's get into the round robin. I think everybody's been on the show before, right, Thomas? And you've been on the show, right? No, okay, this is your first time. Well, never mind. You just seem so familiar and friendly and dancy. I'm like, this is great. The round robin is a point when you can tell the audience pretty much whatever closing thoughts, things you want them to take with them, wish them a happy day. It's your few minutes. So let's start with Caroline.
Yes. Well, I think so. The city of Eureka is on track to see a lot of changes in the next few years. The whole region is. I mean, we have some really big things potentially happening. I mean, Cal Poly Humboldt is already happening with increased enrollment. We've got the offshore wind and all of that potential development coming. There's just going to be a lot of changes happening. And one of the things that we can do to make that not so shocking is to actually prepare for those changes happening. And this is one of those things. And as somebody I know who has a business in Old Town recently said, in regards to the building that's going up there on 2nd and E, which will have a rooftop bar, which is going to be pretty dope. But that, and they were saying right now it's super annoying, and I am prepared to be annoyed for the next few months, but when it's done, it's going to be really great. And I think that that's just like the mantra that many of us need to have as this is happening. Like, these changes are going to happen. Like, streets are going to look different than we're used to them looking. There's going to be buildings where they weren't there before. But if we just like get through the annoying part and engage, if you are supportive of these things, please engage, because people tend to come out more often when they disagree with something than when they agree. And we definitely need to hear from people who are supportive. But it's going to be pretty great in the next few years when we have, more housing, more bike lanes, just more people out enjoying all the great things that are Humboldt County. So,
and more job opportunities if all those buildings go up.
Yeah.
And especially if there's more businesses moving in. That sounds great to me. Colin.
Yeah, I guess I agree. I think it's exciting. Not only the prospect of having more and better housing available, but also, as I keep returning to, because this is kind of my thing, but having housing in places that allow people to live that kind of like walkable lifestyle. CRTP has done surveys in years past around Humboldt County, and it's like almost everybody wants to drive less if they could, and it's like giving people opportunities to do that, to live that lifestyle. And like it's healthier, it's better for you, it's better for the economy, it's like better for the planet. I think it's exciting, and I hope that we can kind of dispense with these frivolous lawsuit claims and move ahead with it.
We just need an E Street trolley that goes from Henderson Center all the way to Old Town, because let's face it, those are the two spots that everybody, at least in the Old Town and Henderson Center area, that's where they all go, and that's where we all live. Like, between those 2 points is like the biggest amount of people who live in Eureka. So where's my trolley? Thomas.
All right, so I set a stopwatch for myself because I really do love to talk. So first, Caroline and I had a meeting this morning with somebody, work meeting. It was in a coffee shop in Old Town. I walked there. After I was done with the meeting, I walked to the bookstore next door and I bought 2 books, and I had a lovely time. And that's one of the things I love about Eureka. That's why I am a Eurekan by choice, and why I choose to live in this area where I can walk to Old Town. So my advocacy for housing for this area is because I love that area and I want to have more neighbors in that area. I think it's going to be an improvement for downtown and Old Town. I understand that there are folks, business owners, who are really stretched right now. It's a hard time to be a business owner. And so I don't want to diminish their fears. I just want to provide an alternative perspective that I think this is going to end up good for them, that this is going to be an economic driver for the downtown and Old Town community. I'm really excited to have all the energy of, 240 plus more people hanging out, living in my favorite spot in Humboldt County. So next, I want to talk about CEQA and the importance of environmental laws. I use this every day in my work. This is the bread and butter of EPIC's work. We've used CEQA to protect Richardson Grove State Park. We've used CEQA to fight old growth logging by Maxam. This is some of the bread and butter of our work. And CEQA is under threat because NIMBY groups like Citizens for a Better Eureka are abusing the law, and they're using it for, to block the environmentally preferred thing. So whether it's housing or renewable energy projects, this is a constant kind of refrain in Sacramento that we need to fix CEQA. We need to reform CEQA. We need to streamline CEQA. That is a risk for the environment because we use it all the time. So if CEQA goes away, our ability to protect the environment using California's environmental laws also go away. Lastly, I think that there's also some degree to which this is a generational problem. The folks who are most impacted by the housing crisis are folks in my generation. I'm a millennial, so are Colin and Caroline. We young people kind of understand that housing is a rare commodity in our communities and that this is going to build more of it. Housing is a market. It responds to supply and demand. If we don't have enough supply, we are going to see increased prices. It's an unfortunate reality. This is the kind of best kind of housing that we can build, though, because it's going to be deed restricted. It's going to be affordable throughout its entire life. So let's get it done. Let's go build some housing.
Yeah, let's go build some housing. I think everyone can agree with that. That's about all the time we have today. Thank you to our panel, Tom Wheeler, who you can listen to him on the Echo News Report every Saturday and Sunday at 11 a.m. in the morning, right here on 96.7 KZZH. We've got Caroline Griffith, as well as Colin Fiske, both absolutely astounding, and you're all welcome back on the show, even just for the dance breaks. We'll be back next week with another Thursday Night Talk. If you have topics or suggestions for the show, please email us at kzzh@accesshumboldt.net. And just a reminder, the show replays Friday evenings at 8 p.m. right here on KZZH 96.7, and watch the show on Access Humboldt's YouTube channel, as well as on the TV. All right, all weekend long it repeats, so cheers.